The CEO told the waitress to go ahead and try to find a $10 million accounting error. She did, by memory. His jaw dropped. Before we dive in, don't forget to like and subscribe so we don't lose each other in the algorithm. This is a story about pride, numbers, and the moment when everything a powerful man thought he knew turned to dust in the hands of someone he'd never even seen. The diner smelled like burnt coffee and yesterday's grease. Not the kind of place where dreams came true, more like where they went to die quietly, one double shift at a time. Clara Morales wiped down table 7 for the third time that evening, her fingers moving in practice circles while her mind wandered somewhere far more complex than the laminated menu she'd memorized years ago, 28 years old. 2 associate degrees gathering dust in a shoebox. Student loans that multiplied like roaches in the dark. And a smile she wore like armor every single night she walked through those glass doors. The dinner rush had thinned to a trickle when they walked in. You could always tell the Wall Street crowd, the way they moved through space like they owned the oxygen itself. Expensive suits that probably cost more than Clara made in 6 months. Phones glued to their palms like life support. Laughter that sounded rehearsed. 5 men, all polished, all loud. The one at the center carried himself differently, taller somehow, though he wasn't. Ethan Ward. Clara didn't recognize the face, but she recognized the type. The kind of man who ordered without looking up, who assumed the world would rearrange itself around his convenience. She approached their table with her notepad and her customer service voice, the one that cost her a little piece of her soul every time she used it. Professional, pleasant, invisible. "Good evening, gentlemen. Can I start you off with something to drink?" Ethan didn't glance up from his phone. "Scotch. Neat. Whatever's top shelf. And water. No ice." His colleagues rattled off their orders while Clara's pen moved efficiently across the page. She'd learned to write without thinking, to smile without feeling, to exist in rooms without taking up space. When she returned with their drinks, one of the men was complaining about a restaurant bill from the previous night. Ethan pulled out his phone, fingers dancing across the calculator app. 23% tip on $247 is... He paused, squinting at the screen. $56.81, Clara said softly, almost reflexively. The table went quiet. Ethan looked up for the first time. His eyes were gray, the color of winter morning sky, and they fixed on her with sudden, sharp attention. "What?" Clara felt heat crawl up her neck. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have. How did you do that?" She shrugged, uncomfortable under the weight of their collective stare. "Just math." One of the other men laughed. "Better than our analysts." Ethan didn't laugh. He studied her like she was a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. For a moment, something flickered across his face. Curiosity, maybe, or suspicion. Then it was gone, replaced by that same dismissive mask. "Impressive," he said, but his tone suggested it wasn't. Not really. Just a parlor trick from someone who probably didn't have much else going for her. Clara nodded and retreated to the kitchen, her heart hammering for reasons she couldn't quite name. Through the service window, she watched him return to his conversation, already forgetting she existed. But she noticed. She always noticed. The way his jaw tightened when his phone buzzed. The way he rubbed his temple like he was trying to physically push a problem out of his skull. The way his colleagues fell silent when he spoke, not out of respect, but out of fear. Power looked different on every person who wore it. On Ethan Ward, It looked like a suit of armor, with cracks only he could feel. The night dragged on. Clara cleared tables, poured coffee, smiled at tired truckers and late-night nurses who actually saw her as human. The Wall Street crew left eventually, generous tip, no eye contact, and she pocketed the cash with hands that had learned not to shake anymore. 3 a.m. The diner emptied except for Manuel, the cook, and Rosa, the other waitress who'd been there since Clara was in high school. Clara sat in the back booth with her laptop, ancient, held together with electrical tape and prayer, and opened the financial analysis software she'd pirated 2 years ago. Numbers filled the screen. Stock trends, quarterly reports, the language she'd spoken fluently before the world decided she was a liar. Rosa passed by with a pot of coffee. "Still playing with those numbers, mija?" "Just keeping sharp. You should be sleeping." "Sleep's expensive." Rosa squeezed her shoulder and moved on. Clara returned to her spreadsheets. To the one place in the world where everything made sense, where patterns revealed themselves to anyone patient enough to look, where truth was absolute and justice was mathematical. She didn't know that in 72 hours, a man in a gray suit would walk back through those doors carrying a problem that would crack her life wide open. But the numbers knew. They always did. The courtroom had been smaller than Clara expected. Hollywood made them look vast and dramatic. Marble columns and soaring ceilings where justice echoed in every corner. Reality was fluorescent lights and uncomfortable chairs and the smell of industrial cleaner trying to mask decades of human desperation. She'd sat in the defendant's box wearing her only good suit, hands folded in her lap, while lawyers who cost more per hour than she made in a month dissected her character like she was already dead. Her attorney, court-appointed, overworked, perpetually exhausted, had advised silence, so she'd stayed silent. Even when Marcus Holloway took the stand, her mentor, the man who'd hired her fresh out of business school, who'd taught her to read the invisible language of financial statements, who'd promised she had a future if she kept her head down and her work sharp. The same man who swore under oath that he'd never seen the documents with her signature, who claimed she'd gone rogue, who painted her as ambitious, reckless, willing to trade insider information for a shortcut to success. She'd wanted to scream, to stand up and tell the truth, that she'd found the discrepancies, that she'd reported them internally, that someone had forged her credentials to cover tracks she'd never walked. But her lawyer's hand had pressed her shoulder, and his voice had whispered in her ear, "They have better lawyers, better connections. You speak up now, you'll get 5 years instead of probation." So she'd taken the probation, the guilty plea for a crime she didn't commit, the permanent stain on her record that made every finance firm in New York treat her resume like biohazard material. 3 years ago, it felt like 30. Now Clara lived in a studio apartment in Queens, where the radiator clanged like a prisoner trying to escape, and the neighbors' arguments bled through walls thin as wishes. Her degrees hung in no frame, tucked in a box beside tax returns and hospital bills from her mother's last year of life. She'd stopped telling people what she used to do. Stopped mentioning that she'd graduated top of her class, that she'd once analyzed merger deals worth hundreds of millions, that numbers spoke to her in a language most people would never hear. Better to be invisible, better to carry plates and smile and let the world forget she'd ever tried to be something more. But late at night, after her shifts ended and the city finally exhaled into something like quiet, Clara opened her laptop and dove back into the world that had betrayed her. She tracked market movements, studied quarterly earnings reports, built predictive models for companies she'd never worked for, taught herself new programming languages, read academic papers on algorithmic trading and behavioral economics, not because she believed she'd return to that life, but because the numbers were the only truth she had left. Old Sam, the regular who came in every Thursday for chicken soup and black coffee, always sat at her station. Retired accountant, kind eyes, hands that trembled slightly when he signed his check. "You're too smart for this place, Claire." "Clara," he said one evening, watching her calculate sales tax in her head faster than the register could process it. "Smart doesn't matter much without credentials. Credentials are just paper. Talent is bone deep." She'd smiled and refilled his coffee. Paper was everything in the world she'd lost. Bone deep meant nothing when doors slammed in your face before you could even speak. Another regular, Patricia, a real estate agent with a mouth that moved faster than her brain, often joked about Clara's abilities. "You should be on Wall Street, honey, running circles around those overpaid boys." The irony tasted like copper in Clara's mouth. She had been on Wall Street for exactly 18 months before it chewed her up and spit her out. Her phone buzzed during her break one night. A LinkedIn message from a recruiter. Her heart had jumped before she read it. Some automated algorithm scraping profiles, not knowing hers was radioactive. The message asked about her interest in a junior analyst position. She'd almost laughed. Almost. Instead, she deleted it. Deleted her LinkedIn profile. Deleted the last remaining thread connecting her to who she used to be. In the diner's bathroom mirror, she barely recognized herself anymore. Still 28, but looking older. Still sharp-eyed, but softer around the edges where hope used to live. She'd learned to braid her dark hair tight, to keep her makeup minimal, to take up less space in a world that had made it clear she wasn't welcome in the rooms that mattered. Her mother's voice echoed sometimes when the nights got too quiet. "You have a gift, Clara. Don't let anyone steal it." But gifts meant nothing when the people holding the doors had already decided you were a thief. The finance degree sat in that box gathering dust. The textbooks lined her apartment walls like tombstones for a life that died before it really lived. But she kept studying, kept learning, kept her mind sharp as a blade she'd never be allowed to use. Because maybe old Sam was right. Maybe talent was bone deep. And maybe, somewhere in the universe that dealt in probabilities and patterns, there was an equation that could balance what had been taken from her. She didn't believe it. Not really. But the numbers didn't need her belief. They simply were. True and constant and waiting for someone patient enough to read them. Ethan Ward returned on a Thursday night when the diner was nearly empty and rain hammered the windows like fists demanding entry. Clara saw him through the glass before he walked in. Shoulders hunched against the weather, phone pressed to his ear. That same tension wound through his posture like wire about to snap. He collapsed into booth 12 without waiting to be seated. Water dripped from his hair onto expensive wool. His tie hung loose around his neck like a noose he'd tried to escape. Clara approached with a menu he wouldn't read, and her practiced smile. "Coffee? Please." His voice carried the weight of someone who hadn't slept properly in days. "And whatever's fastest." She brought him coffee so black it could strip paint and a slice of cherry pie that Manuel had made that morning. Ethan stared at both like they were written in a language he'd forgotten. Rough night? The words slipped out before Clara could stop them. She wasn't supposed to engage, wasn't supposed to be anything more than a moving part of the service machinery. Ethan looked up. Recognition flickered. The waitress with the math trick. He laughed, but it sounded hollow. Rough month, rough year. Take your pick. Clara should have walked away. Should have let him eat in peace and tip generously and disappear back into whatever gilded nightmare he'd emerged from. But something in his face stopped her. Exhaustion, yes. But also something else. Fear, maybe. The kind that came when the walls you'd built started crumbling. Sometimes talking to a stranger helps, she offered quietly. No judgment, no consequences. He studied her for a long moment. Then, as if making a decision he'd regret, he gestured to the seat across from him. You have a minute? She shouldn't. Rosa would give her that look. Manuel would shake his head. But the diner was empty except for a trucker 2 booths down who was half asleep over his eggs. Clara slid into the booth. Ethan ran his hand through his wet hair. We're missing $10 million. Clara's spine straightened involuntarily. Not missing, that's the wrong word. It's there, somewhere in the books. But my entire team, analysts from Harvard, MIT, Wharton, they've been combing through months of transactions and they can't find it. The board's breathing down my neck. Our investors are asking questions. And if we don't locate it before the quarterly audit, he trailed off, staring into his coffee like it held answers. Clara's fingers itched for a pen. How long has it been unaccounted for? 3 months, maybe 4. It showed up as a discrepancy in April. We thought it was a simple reconciliation error. Then it wasn't. Her mind was already moving, sorting through possibilities. What kind of firm? Private equity. We handle mergers, acquisitions, venture capital, mostly tech sector. Last year we managed $2.3 billion in assets. $2.3 billion. The number arranged itself in Clara's head like pieces of a puzzle, clicking into place. And the missing amount is exactly $10 million? $10,073,412. Clara's breath caught. Not a round number, not an estimate, specific, intentional. That's not missing, she said slowly. That's hidden. Ethan leaned forward. What? Round numbers disappear by accident. Specific amounts disappear on purpose. Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe. Or the first hint of hope in months. You sound like you know what you're talking about. I used to. The words came out before she could cage them. Used to what? Clara looked away. Through the window, rain continued its assault on the city. Doesn't matter. But Ethan wouldn't let it go. His gray eyes had sharpened. That CEO focus suddenly locked on her like a spotlight. You did the tip calculation in your head. Instantly. No hesitation. That's not normal. Lots of people are good at math. Not like that. He pulled out his phone, fingers flying across the screen. Then he brought up a PDF. She could see columns of numbers even from across the table, and turned it toward her. This is one page from last quarter's consolidated statement, 40 transactions, multiple accounts. Tell me what you see. Clara's hands stayed flat on the table. I'm a waitress. You need accountants. I have accountants. They're useless. Frustration bled through his words. You walk around this diner calculating tips and order totals faster than a computer. You just told me the difference between accidental and intentional financial discrepancies like you've done forensic accounting. So humor me, please. The please surprised her. Men like Ethan Ward didn't say please to people like her. She looked at the phone, at the numbers arranged in neat rows. Her eyes scanned the page, once, twice, and something cold settled in her stomach. Well? Ethan pressed. Clara's finger traced a line across the screen, not quite touching. Column E, transaction dates. They're sequential except for 3 entries that jump backward by 48 hours each. Same amount pattern. Incremental increases of 0.02%. That's not workflow delay. That's backdating. The color drained from Ethan's face. And here, her finger moved. Account 7774. It appears 6 times in this single page with different subsidiary tags. But if you aggregate the transfers, she paused, doing the math. That's 2,100,000 in circular movement. Money leaving and returning through shell routing. Ethan's hand trembled slightly as he pulled the phone back. How did you... His voice cracked. My team spent 2 weeks on this page alone. Clara met his eyes. Because they're looking for mistakes. You need someone looking for lies. The diner lights hummed. Rain drummed. Somewhere in the kitchen, Manuel was whistling off-key. Ethan set his phone down slowly, deliberately, like he was placing a bomb on the table. You're not just a waitress. Yes, I am. No. He leaned back, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. You're something else. Someone who ended up here for a reason. And I'm betting it wasn't your choice. Clara stood up. Your pie's getting cold. Wait. Ethan's voice stopped her. I have an entire ledger. 12 months of transactions. Hundreds of pages. If you can find where that 10 million went, if you can tell me who moved it and why, I'll pay you. I don't... $50,000. Cash. No paperwork. No questions. The number hit her like a fist. $50,000. That was her student loans. That was 6 months of breathing room. That was the difference between surviving and drowning. Just look at the documents, Ethan pressed. Tonight. Now. I have them in my car. Give me 2 hours of your time. If you can't find anything, I'll leave, and you'll never see me again. But if you can... Clara's hands were shaking. She pressed them against her apron. Why me? Because desperation recognizes desperation. And you just diagnosed a complex financial fraud pattern in 30 seconds from a phone screen in a diner at midnight. He stood up, pulling his wallet out. Please, I'm asking. There it was again. Please. From a man who probably hadn't asked for anything in years. Clara looked toward the kitchen. Manuel had stopped whistling. Rosa was watching from behind the counter with worried eyes. Every instinct screamed to walk away, to protect herself, to stay invisible. But $50,000. And a puzzle her mind was already trying to solve against her will. 2 hours, she heard herself say. That's all. Ethan's face transformed, relief so profound it almost looked like pain. Thank you. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder, set it on the table between them. The label read, Q1, Q4, Consolidated Statements, Confidential. Clara sat back down, opened the folder. Let her eyes fall on numbers that sang to her in a language she tried to forget. And somewhere in those pages, buried under layers of legitimate transactions, she saw it. The pattern, the intentional misdirection, the ghost trail of money that had been moved very carefully by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Her finger stopped on one entry. Transaction date, April 17th. Amount, $10,073,412. Transferred from operational accounts to escrow holding under acquisition project code name Northstar. "It's not missing," Clara said quietly, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "It was moved, deliberately, into escrow for an acquisition that never happened." Ethan went absolutely still. "What?" "Someone created a phantom acquisition, routed the money into holding. It's sitting there, tagged as allocated capital, which is why it doesn't appear as available funds." But the project was never real. The money's frozen in limbo. "Who?" Ethan's voice was barely a whisper. "Who would do that?" Clara's finger traced two initials buried in the authorization field. M.H. Marcus Holloway, the name that still woke her up some nights. Her old mentor. The man who'd destroyed her career. And apparently, he'd moved from framing junior analysts to embezzling from private equity firms. "These initials," Clara said carefully, "do they mean anything to you?" Ethan's face went white, then red. "My head of acquisitions. He's been with me for 8 years. The diner lights flickered, rain continued falling, and Clara Morales, the waitress with a photographic memory and a ruined reputation, just found the missing $10 million that a room full of Ivy League analysts couldn't locate." "I'll need to verify the routing paths," she said, her professional voice returning like muscle memory. "Cross-reference the escrow documentation. Confirm the signatory chain. But if I'm right..." She looked up at Ethan. "This isn't just missing money. This is fraud. And whoever did it has been planning this for months." Ethan sat down heavily, like his legs had given out. He stared at Clara like she'd just walked on water. "You did that," he whispered, "in 10 minutes. From one page." Clara closed the folder. Her hands were steadier now. "I told you, I used to be good at this." "Used to be?" Ethan laughed, but it sounded broken. "You just saved my entire company." No, she just complicated her life in ways she couldn't begin to calculate. But as she looked at the folder, at the proof that Marcus Holloway was still out there, still stealing, still destroying lives, something sharp and cold crystallized in her chest. Maybe this wasn't about the money. Maybe this was about finally telling the truth. The diner's back office smelled like burnt coffee and old paper. Clara spread the ledgers across the table while Ethan stood behind her, close enough that she could feel the heat of his presence, but far enough to maintain the pretense of professional distance. Her finger moved across the pages with surgical precision. "Here, account 4927, operational expenses for the Northstar acquisition. Except if you look at the subsidiary routing." She flipped to another page, not even pausing to search. "The same amount appears here, under marketing expenditure for a completely different client. Same date, same authorization code." Ethan leaned closer, his breath catching. "How is that possible?" "It's not. Not legitimately." Clara's pen traced a line connecting 3 separate entries. "This is layered expense shells. You take one transaction and split it across multiple client accounts using different category codes. To anyone glancing at individual statements, it looks normal. Marketing here, operational there, capital expenditure somewhere else. But aggregate them." She pulled out a blank sheet and started writing numbers. "The total matches exactly. $10,073,412. The pen moved faster than thought. Addition, subtraction, cross-referencing account codes from memory. Ethan watched her like he was witnessing something impossible. The beauty of this method, Clara continued, her voice steady and clinical, is that it exploits trust. Your analysts review client accounts separately. They're looking for discrepancies within individual portfolios, not patterns across multiple unrelated clients. The person who did this understood your internal audit process intimately. She flipped to another section. They also knew the threshold limits. Any single transaction over 7 million flags for board review. So they broke it into smaller pieces. 3 million here, 4 million there. 2 million scattered across operational accounts. Stay under the radar. Move slowly. By the time anyone notices, the money's been laundered through so many legitimate-looking transactions that tracing it back becomes nearly impossible. Ethan pulled out the chair beside her and sat down heavily. His face had gone pale. This isn't just theft. This is sophisticated financial fraud. Clara met his eyes. Whoever did this has either done it before or studied extensively how to do it right. They understand forensic accounting. They know what auditors look for. And they have access to authorization codes that should be restricted to senior leadership. How do you know all this? Ethan's voice was barely a whisper. You're not just good at math. He gestured helplessly at the papers covered in her annotations. This is professional-level forensic analysis, the kind we pay consultants 6 figures to produce. Clara's hands stilled. For a moment she considered lying, deflecting, maintaining the safe anonymity of being nobody important. But the numbers between them demanded truth. I used to be a financial analyst, she said quietly, before I was a waitress. I worked for firms like yours. I was good at it, really good. What happened? I found something I wasn't supposed to find, and when I reported it, the people responsible made sure I took the fall instead. She closed the ledger, her movements deliberate. I have a record now. Fraud charges. Pleaded guilty to insider trading I didn't commit because fighting it would have bankrupted me and landed me in prison anyway. No firm in New York will touch me. No bank. No financial institution of any kind. So I serve coffee and try not to think about the fact that I'm watching people like you make decisions I could make better while sleeping. The words came out harder than she'd intended. Bitter. Raw. Ethan was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried something she didn't expect. Not pity, understanding. My father was a hedge fund manager, he said. When I was 16, his partner embezzled $40 million and pinned it on him. Dad fought the charges for 3 years, lost everything. Our house, his reputation, his will to keep living. He died of a heart attack the week before his name was cleared. Clara looked at him, really looked, past the expensive suit and the CEO armor, saw the kid who'd watched his father destroyed by the same kind of corruption she'd survived. I built my firm on one principle, Ethan continued. Total control, complete transparency. I trust nobody. I verify everything. I thought that would keep me safe. He laughed bitterly. Turns out, I was wrong. You weren't wrong to want control, Clara said softly. You were wrong to think you could maintain it alone. Trust is what makes systems vulnerable. But isolation is what makes them blind. Ethan stared at the ledgers spread between them, at the proof that someone he trusted had stolen from him using methods his entire team had missed. You found this in minutes. My analysts spent months. Your analysts were looking for mistakes, Clara repeated. I was looking for lies. There's a difference. He turned to face her fully. In the harsh fluorescent light of the back office, his gray eyes had darkened to storm cloud silver. I want to hire you. No. Name your price. Anything. This isn't about money. Clara stood up, gathering the papers into neat stacks. I helped you because I needed to know if I was right, if my skills still meant something, if I could still do what I used to do before everything fell apart. And? She looked down at the evidence she'd assembled. The pattern she'd uncovered, the truth she'd extracted from numbers that had hidden themselves in plain sight. I'm still good at this, maybe better than I was before, because now I know what to look for. Then work with me, Ethan pressed. Help me find who did this. Help me make sure it never happens again. Clara shook her head. You don't understand. My name is poison in your world. If anyone finds out you're working with me, it'll raise questions about your judgment, your credibility. I'm trying to help you, not destroy you. What if I don't care? You should. She handed him the organized files, her annotations clear and comprehensive. Take this to your legal team. Follow the money trail I've mapped. You'll find your thief, but do it without me. I've already risked too much by being here. Ethan took the papers, but his eyes never left her face. You're afraid. I'm realistic. People like me don't get second chances in your world. We get scapegoated and erased. I've made peace with that. Have you? The question landed like a challenge. Because from where I'm sitting, you just spent 2 hours proving you're exactly what this industry needs. Someone who actually gives a damn about finding the truth instead of covering it up. Clara grabbed her jacket from the chair. The truth doesn't matter if nobody believes you when you speak it. She walked toward the door. Behind her, she heard Ethan stand. Heard the rustle of paper as he gathered the evidence she'd given him. Clara. She stopped, but didn't turn around. Thank you, he said, for seeing what everyone else missed, for trusting me with your truth, for being brilliant when the world tried to convince you that you weren't. Her throat tightened. She nodded once and walked out into the diner's dining room, where Manuel was flipping burgers and Rosa was refilling salt shakers, and everything was exactly as it had been an hour ago. Except Clara wasn't. For the first time in 3 years, she'd let herself remember what it felt like to be good at something that mattered, to use her mind the way it was meant to be used. And the memory hurt more than the forgetting ever had. 3 days passed. Clara served coffee, smiled at customers, and tried not to think about gray eyes and numbers that sang truths nobody wanted to hear. She almost succeeded. Then Ethan walked into the diner at 2 in the afternoon, carrying a laptop and an expression that suggested he hadn't slept since she'd last seen him. He sat at booth 12, same spot, different weather. Outside, autumn sunlight painted the city gold instead of gray. Clara approached with her notepad and her armor. Coffee? And your time. He opened the laptop. Please, I need your help again. I told you. The trail goes deeper than we thought. The shell accounts link to offshore holdings. The timestamps suggest this has been happening for at least 2 years. And the authorization codes. He turned the screen toward her. They're coming from inside my executive team, someone I eat lunch with, someone I trust. Clara's chest tightened. She knew that betrayal, knew how it tasted. "I can't do this without you," Ethan said quietly. "My legal team is good, but they're not you. They see numbers, you see stories. Please." She should walk away, should protect herself, should remember what happened the last time she tried to expose corruption from the inside. But Ethan was looking at her like she was the only lifeline in a drowning ocean. And Clara had spent 3 years being invisible, being silent, being nobody. Maybe it was time to remember how to be somebody again. "Not here," she said finally, "somewhere private, with better coffee." Relief washed over his face. "I know a place." The cafe was tucked into a quiet corner of the Upper West Side. Exposed brick, soft jazz, the kind of place where people wrote novels and fell in love and pretended the world outside didn't exist. Ethan had reserved a private back room. There was a table, 2 chairs, an espresso machine that probably cost more than Clara's monthly rent, and a stack of files that looked like they'd survived a war. "Tell me everything," Clara said, settling into the chair across from him. For the next hour, Ethan walked her through what his team had uncovered. The offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. The shell companies registered in Delaware with generic names and no physical addresses. The carefully timed transactions that moved money out of the firm and into holding accounts that existed only on paper. Clara listened, absorbed. Let the patterns arrange themselves in her mind like constellations becoming visible after dark. "Can I see the original authorization logs?" she asked. Ethan pulled up the files. Clara scanned them, her eyes moving faster than seemed humanly possible. Then she stopped, went back, read one entry 3 times. "What?" Ethan asked. "This coding style." Her finger traced the authorization sequence. The way the timestamps are structured. The specific syntax used for account references. She looked up, her face pale. "I've seen this before." "Where?" Clara's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the table. "In the documents that sent me to court. The insider trading files that had my signature but weren't written by me. The authorization codes that proved I'd accessed restricted accounts, except I hadn't. This is the same person, same methodology, same digital fingerprint." The room went very quiet. Ethan leaned forward. "You're saying whoever framed you is now stealing from me?" "I'm saying whoever wrote this code learned from the same source. Or," Clara's voice dropped to almost a whisper, "it's the same person, and they're doing it again." "Who?" Clara pulled out her phone. Her hands were steadier now. Anger was a clarifying force. She opened an old photo, the one she'd kept even though looking at it felt like pressing on a bruise. Her old office, her team, and standing in the center, smiling like he owned the world. "Marcus Holloway," she said, "my former mentor, the man who testified against me, the man who walked away clean while I lost everything." Ethan took the phone, studied the photo. "I don't recognize him." "You wouldn't. He doesn't use his real name anymore. Too much bad press from my trial. But I'd bet my life he's somewhere in your organization under a different identity. Probably senior level, close enough to access restricted files. Trusted enough that nobody questions his authorization." "How do we find him?" Clara's smile was sharp and cold. "We follow the pattern. He has tells, behavioral signatures in how he moves money. If I'm right, there will be other discrepancies, smaller ones that your team dismissed as clerical errors." Show me everything flagged in the last 3 years, every unexplained variance, every transaction that didn't quite make sense. Ethan started pulling up files. This is going to take hours. Then we'd better order more coffee. They worked until the sun set and the cafe lights softened to amber. Clara moved through data like a surgeon, precise, methodical, looking for infection in tissue that appeared healthy. Ethan watched her, occasionally asking questions, mostly just bearing witness to genius that had been trapped in a diner for far too long. Around 8, she looked up. "Tell me about your co-founder." Ethan blinked. "Marshall? What about him?" "When did you meet him?" "Business school. Wharton. We started the firm together 7 years ago. He handles acquisitions. I handle operations." "And you trust him?" "With my life." Ethan's voice was firm. "Marshall is family. He's the only person who stood by me when everyone else walked away. When my father died and the rumors started circulating that maybe the apple didn't fall far from the tree, Marshall defended me, vouched for me. We built this company from nothing. So yes, I trust him completely." Clara made a note. "What's his full name?" "Marshall Edward Cross." "Why?" She didn't answer. Just typed the name into a database she'd maintained for 3 years, a private collection of financial records, court documents, and connections that had obsessed her during long, sleepless nights. The search came back with one hit: Marshall Cross. Previously, Marcus Holloway. Name legally changed 4 years ago in Nevada. Clara's blood turned to ice. "Clara?" Ethan's voice sounded far away. "What did you find?" She turned the screen toward him, showed him the documents, the proof, the evidence that his best friend, his co-founder, his brother in everything but blood, was the man who destroyed her life and was now destroying his. Ethan stared at the screen, all color drained from his face. "No, that's not. There has to be a mistake. Marshall wouldn't." "Look at the timeline," Clara said softly. "He changed his name 6 months after my trial ended, right when the press coverage was worst. Then he rebuilt his identity, became someone new, someone trustworthy, and he's been stealing from you the same way he stole from my old firm. He's just better at hiding it now." Ethan stood up so fast his chair fell backward. "I don't believe you. Marshall is... He's my friend. He's my partner. You're wrong. You have to be wrong." Clara had known this moment would come. The moment when someone had to choose between believing her and believing someone they loved. She'd lost this choice every single time before. "Check his records," she said quietly. "Deep background. Before Wharton. Before the name change. If I'm wrong, I'll walk away and never speak of this again." But she wasn't wrong. She could see it in the numbers, in the patterns, in the way Marshall Cross had built his entire new life on the foundation of her destroyed one. Ethan grabbed his laptop and his files. "I need to go." "Ethan, I'll call you." His voice was tight, controlled, the voice of someone whose world was cracking open. "Thank you for your time." He walked out, left money on the table, disappeared into the New York night like he was running from something he couldn't outpace. Clara sat alone in the empty back room, staring at the evidence that proved her right and feeling nothing but hollow. She'd been right about the numbers, right about the pattern, right about everything. But she'd forgotten the most important truth. People never wanted to believe that the ones they loved were monsters. And Clara would always be easier to doubt then the people who smiled and lied and stole while wearing expensive suits. The diner was quiet on Saturday morning. Too quiet. Clara moved through her shift like a ghost, pouring coffee and clearing plates while her mind replayed Ethan's expression when she'd shown him the truth about Marshall Cross. The look of a man whose trust had been weaponized against him. She knew that look, wore it herself 3 years ago. Rosa touched her shoulder around noon. "You okay, mija? You've been somewhere else all morning." "Just tired." "You're always tired. This is different." Rosa squeezed gently. "Heartbreak tired." Clara almost laughed. "You couldn't break what was already shattered." Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. "Clara Morales." The voice was smooth, confident, familiar in a way that made her skin crawl. "Who is this?" "Marshall Cross. I believe you've been discussing me with my business partner. I thought we should talk." Clara's hand tightened around the phone. "I have nothing to say to you. But I have something to say to you. Stay away from Ethan. Stop spreading lies about me. You're damaged goods, Clara. A convicted fraudster. Nobody believes people like you. Nobody ever has. Ethan will see the truth." "Will he?" Marshall's laugh was cold. "I've known him for 7 years. You've known him for a week. Who do you think he'll trust? His best friend and co-founder? Or the desperate waitress with a criminal record who's clearly trying to extort money by making wild accusations?" The line went dead. Clara stood there, phone pressed to her ear, listening to silence that sounded like all her worst fears confirmed. The afternoon dragged. Then evening. Clara worked mechanically, her body present while her mind spiraled through every worst-case scenario. Ethan would choose Marshall. Of course he would. Everyone always chose the lie that felt comfortable over the truth that demanded sacrifice. At midnight, she finally went home. Her studio apartment was exactly as she'd left it, cramped, cold, unchanged. She pulled out the box from her closet, the one with her diplomas, her old business cards, the acceptance letter from Wharton's graduate program that she'd never been able to afford. Evidence of a life that should have been hers. She stared at the documents until the words blurred. Then, with hands that barely shook anymore, she carried the box to the trash chute. Better to let it all go. Better to stop pretending the past could ever be redeemed. Her finger was on the lever when someone knocked. Clara froze, looked through the peephole. Ethan stood in her hallway. His suit was wrinkled. His eyes were red. His hair looked like he'd been running his hands through it for hours. She opened the door. He held up a folder. "You were right." Clara couldn't breathe. "Marshall fled the country." Ethan continued, his voice raw. 6 hours ago. Private jet to a country with no extradition treaty. I confronted him this afternoon. Showed him your analysis. And he..." His voice broke. "He admitted everything. The embezzlement, the shell accounts, the fact that he'd been stealing from the firm since we started. He laughed, Clara. Called me naive, said I was too trusting, too stupid. That I deserved to be robbed." Tears ran down Ethan's face. He didn't wipe them away. "And then he said something else. He said you were just collateral damage from his last job. That framing you was the easiest payday he'd ever made. That you were convenient because you were smart enough to find the discrepancies, but too powerless to fight back." Clara's legs gave out. She sank to the floor of her apartment entryway. Ethan sat down beside her. "I doubted you. When you showed me the evidence, I chose to protect my friendship instead of believing the truth. And I'm sorry. God, Clara, I'm so sorry." "You weren't the first," she whispered, And you won't be the last. People like me don't get believed. We get used and discarded. No. Ethan's hand found hers. People like you get vindicated. I've already contacted the district attorney, provided them with everything you found. The evidence that proves Marshall framed you. The timeline that shows you were telling the truth 3 years ago. They're reopening your case. Clara looked up. What? Your record will be cleared. Your conviction overturned. It won't give you back what you lost, but it's a start. The box of diplomas sat beside them, evidence she'd been about to throw away. Why? Clara asked. Why are you doing this? Because you saved me, and because Ethan's voice dropped to something softer, more honest. Because in 1 week, you've shown me more integrity than I've seen in 7 years of business. Because you're brilliant and brave and you deserve better than what the world gave you. And because I can't fix my father's story, but maybe I can help fix yours. Clara started crying. Not delicate tears, ugly, broken sobs that came from 3 years of holding everything inside. Ethan pulled her close, let her fall apart, held her together while she shattered. I believe you, he whispered into her hair. I should have believed you from the beginning, but I believe you now, and I won't stop until everyone else does too. Outside, the city hummed. Inside, 2 people who'd been broken by the same man sat on the floor of a tiny apartment and let themselves be human. The truth had a cost. It always did. But maybe, just maybe, it also had a reward. The district attorney's office smelled like old books and new beginnings. Clara sat across from a woman with steel gray hair and eyes that had seen too many lies to be impressed by another one. Miss Morales, we've reviewed the evidence Mr. Ward provided. The authorization patterns, the coding signatures, the timeline of transactions, everything matches the methodology used in the fraud you were convicted for 3 years ago. Clara's hands were folded in her lap, steady, calm. She'd imagined this moment 1,000 times, but never believed it would come. We're recommending your conviction be overturned, full exoneration. The record will show you were wrongfully accused. We're also opening a federal investigation into Marcus Holloway, also known as Marshall Cross, for fraud, embezzlement, and perjury. The words should have felt like victory. Instead, they felt like finally being allowed to breathe after drowning for 3 years. Ethan sat beside her, silent support. He'd spent the last 2 weeks assembling an army of lawyers, forensic accountants, and investigators. Had personally delivered a 100-page report documenting every lie Marshall had built his new life upon. What happens now? Clara asked. We'll issue a public statement. Hold a press conference if you're willing. Your name deserves to be cleared as publicly as it was destroyed. Clara thought about that, about standing in front of cameras and microphones, about facing the world that had watched her fall and done nothing to catch her. I'll do it, she said. Not for revenge, for every other person out there who's been blamed for crimes they didn't commit, so they know someone fought back and won. The press conference was held on a Thursday afternoon. Clara wore a simple navy dress Ethan had insisted on buying her. She stood behind a podium decorated with the seal of the New York District Attorney's Office and spoke in a voice that didn't shake. 3 years ago, I was convicted of insider trading. I lost my career, my reputation, and my future. I was 25 years old and suddenly unemployable in the only field I'd ever loved. I took a plea deal because fighting would have destroyed what little I had left. I stayed silent because I believed that's what people like me were supposed to do. The room was packed. Cameras flashed. Reporters scribbled notes. But silence doesn't serve justice. It serves the people who profit from it. Marcus Holloway stole from multiple companies, framed me to cover his tracks, and then rebuilt his identity so he could do it all again. He succeeded because institutions protected him and nobody protected me. Clara looked directly into the cameras. I don't want revenge. I don't want apologies. I want to work in a world where the truth matters more than convenience, where brilliant people aren't thrown away because it's easier than admitting we were wrong, where women like me get second chances the same way men in expensive suits get fifth and sixth ones. She stepped back from the podium. The room erupted in questions. Ethan guided her out through a side door while security held back the surge. In the car, Clara finally let herself feel it. The weight lifting, the vindication settling into her bones like sunlight after winter. "You were incredible," Ethan said softly. "I was honest." She looked out the window at the city that had crushed her and was now being forced to acknowledge its mistake. "That's all I ever wanted to be." The story went viral within hours. Social media exploded with support. Comment sections filled with people sharing their own stories of being scapegoated, silenced, overlooked. A legal defense fund appeared overnight. Anonymous donors paid off her remaining legal debt. $18,000 erased in a single afternoon. News outlets requested interviews. Clara did 3, said the same thing every time. "This isn't about me. It's about everyone like me." On the 5th day after the press conference, a package arrived at her apartment. Inside was a handwritten letter from a woman in Chicago who'd been blamed for accounting errors at her company. She'd stayed silent for fear of retaliation. Clara's story had given her courage to speak up. An investigation was launched. The real culprit was found. "You saved my career," the letter ended. "Thank you for being brave enough to tell your truth." Clara kept that letter, and the dozens that followed, evidence that her pain had purpose, that her voice had reached people who needed to hear it. The diner threw her a party. Manuel made a cake. Rosa cried. Old Sam raised his coffee cup in a toast. To the smartest waitress who ever served terrible coffee and brilliant justice. Clara laughed, really laughed, for the first time in 3 years. That night, alone in her apartment, she opened the box of diplomas, looked at the degrees that had meant everything and nothing, and carefully, reverently, she hung them on her wall. Not as artifacts of a dead life, but as proof of a life being resurrected. 2 weeks later, Ethan called. "I need to see you, tonight. Please." His voice carried something Clara couldn't quite identify. Nervousness, maybe. Hope. "Where?" "I'll send a car." The car took her to a building in Midtown, sleek glass and steel reaching toward a darkening sky. The elevator opened to a rooftop garden Clara didn't know existed. String lights hung between trees planted in massive containers. The city spread below them like scattered diamonds. Ethan stood near the edge, wearing jeans and a sweater instead of his usual armor of tailored suits. He looked younger, more human. "This is beautiful," Clara said. "It's mine." "Well, the building is. I bought it 5 years ago, but I never use this space. Too quiet, too peaceful. Seemed like a waste when I was always working." He gestured to a small table set with wine and food that smelled like someone had actually cared while cooking it. They ate slowly, talked about everything except the obvious. Clara told him about the letters she'd received. Ethan told her about restructuring his firm, firing 3 executives who'd enabled Marshall's fraud through willful ignorance. "I've been thinking," Ethan said, when the plates were cleared and the city lights had multiplied below them, "about what you said during the press conference, about building a world where truth matters more than convenience." Clara waited. "I want to rebuild my firm around that principle. Complete financial transparency. Ethics, first auditing. A place where people like you, brilliant, honest, unwilling to compromise, can actually thrive." He turned to face her fully. "And I want you to lead it." The words hung in the cool evening air. "What?" "Not as my employee, as my partner. Equal equity, equal authority. You design the systems, hire the team, set the standards. I'll handle operations and funding. You handle everything that actually matters." Clara's heart was racing. "Ethan, I can't." "You can. You already proved it. You found what dozens of trained analysts missed. You exposed fraud that had been hidden for years. You testified in front of the world with more courage than I've ever seen. You're exactly what this industry needs." "I'm a waitress with a cleared record, but no recent experience. No one will take me seriously." "Then we make them." Ethan's voice was firm. "We build something so good they can't ignore it. We hire the overlooked people, the women who were told they weren't enough, the analysts who asked too many questions, the whistleblowers who got punished for being right. We create the firm we both wish had existed when we needed it." Clara looked out at the city, at the lights that represented millions of lives, millions of stories, millions of people trying to survive in systems designed to use them. "On one condition," she said finally, "anything. We prioritize hiring women who've been pushed out, single mothers who need flexible schedules, people with records who deserve second chances, immigrants whose degrees aren't recognized here. We don't just talk about ethics, we live them." Ethan smiled. The real smile, not the CEO mask. "Deal." He extended his hand. Clara shook it, felt the weight of possibility settle between them. "When do we start?" "Tomorrow?" Ethan laughed. "Or we could finish this wine first. Celebrate properly. Take one night to just be 2 people who survived something terrible and came out the other side." Clara poured them both more wine, raised her glass. "To truth, to second chances, to proving that kindness and competence aren't weaknesses. To you," Ethan added softly, "for being brave enough to stay brilliant when the world wanted you to disappear." Their glasses clinked. The city hummed below, and Clara Morales, former waitress, current vindicated analyst, future partner in a firm that didn't exist yet, she smiled. Not the customer service smile, not the survival smile, the real one, the one that came from hope instead of habit. "And Ethan," she said, leaning forward slightly. "Yes?" "I'll take that coffee now." He laughed, poured coffee from a carafe she hadn't noticed. It was good coffee, not diner coffee, the kind that cost more per cup than she used to make in an hour. But sitting there on that rooftop with possibilities stretching before them like the city lights, Clara realized the best things in life couldn't be measured in money. They were measured in moments, in trust rebuilt, in truth finally rewarded, in second chances that became new beginnings. 6 months passed, like a breath held, and finally released. The firm opened on a Tuesday morning in April, not in a gleaming downtown tower, but in a renovated building in Brooklyn where rent was reasonable and windows actually opened. The sign read, Ward and Morales Financial Ethics Consulting. Clara arrived early, stood in the empty lobby and let the reality settle. Her name, on a building, on business cards, on a future she'd stopped believing in. The team they'd assembled was small but fierce. 12 analysts, 7 from traditional backgrounds, 5 from backgrounds like Clara's, checkered past, unconventional educations, stories of being overlooked and underestimated. Maya, 32, had been fired from 3 firms for asking too many questions about suspicious transactions. Now she ran their fraud detection unit. James, 41, had taken 8 years off to raise his kids and couldn't get hired anywhere afterward. Now he designed their work-life balance policies. Priya had immigrated from India with a doctorate in economics that American firms refused to recognize. Now, she headed their international compliance division. Every person in that building had been told they weren't good enough. Every person had proven the world wrong. Ethan walked in carrying coffee and croissants. Ready? Terrified, Clara admitted. But yes. Their first client was small, a non-profit worried about embezzlement. Clara's team found it in 3 days. Not because they were magic, because they looked for truth instead of convenient answers. Word spread. More clients came, then bigger ones, then calls from companies who'd read about Clara's story and wanted someone who actually gave a damn about integrity. By August, they'd uncovered fraud in 7 organizations, saved 3 companies from bankruptcy, testified in 2 federal cases, and hired 8 more people the industry had discarded. On a Saturday afternoon in September, Clara walked into the old diner. It looked the same, smelled the same, but the energy was different. Rosa spotted her first. Clara, look at you, all fancy. I'm not fancy, I just showered. Manuel emerged from the kitchen with that gap-toothed smile. Our celebrity. You want your old job back? Not a chance, but I'll take coffee. They sat in booth 12, Clara's old station, and caught up. Manuel's daughter had gotten into college. Rosa's son was getting married. The diner had finally fixed the broken freezer. We have something for you, Rosa said mysteriously. She led Clara to the wall by the entrance. There, mounted on a small brass plaque, was a photo of the diner at night. Below it, engraved words. Where justice was served, Clara Morales found the truth here when the world said it didn't exist. May we all be brave enough to look closer. Clara's eyes burned. You didn't have to. Yes, we did. Rosa hugged her tight. You started here. Now everyone who walks through that door will know that brilliant things can begin anywhere, that people aren't defined by their worst moments, that truth wins eventually. Clara touched the plaque, cold metal under her fingertips. Permanent, real. Outside, the city continued its endless motion. Inside, in a small diner that had been her refuge and her prison and her launching pad, Clara stood among people who'd seen her at her lowest and loved her anyway. Her phone buzzed. Ethan. New client, big one, possible systematic fraud in a healthcare network. They specifically requested you. Clara typed back, I'll be there in 20. She said goodbye to Manuel and Rosa, promised to visit more often, walked out into September sunshine that felt like blessing. The girl who'd served coffee and hidden her brilliance was gone. In her place stood a woman who'd learned that truth was worth fighting for, that second chances existed for those brave enough to demand them, that kindness and competence and courage could change everything. Not immediately, not easily, but inevitably. Clara Morales had been knocked down, silenced, nearly broken. But she'd gotten back up, and in doing so, she'd proven something the world desperately needed to remember. Your worth isn't determined by who believes in you. It's determined by whether you believe in yourself enough to keep standing. Kindness, truth, and quiet brilliance. They may take time, but they never stay buried. Sometimes all it takes is one person willing to look a little closer. One person brave enough to speak when silence is easier. One person who refuses to let the world define them by their darkest moment. Clara's story reminds us that genius doesn't always arrive in expected packages. That second chances are earned through persistence, not perfection. That the people society overlooks are often the ones with the clearest vision. So thank you for listening to this letter of hope. And remember, never underestimate the power of those the world overlooks. They might just be the ones who change everything. Don't forget to like and subscribe so we can keep sharing these stories together. Because somewhere out there, someone needs to hear that their comeback is possible. That truth matters. That brilliance suppressed is not brilliance destroyed. It's just brilliance waiting for its moment, and that moment always comes.